Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the Speak for Yourself podcast. My name is Casey, and I will be your host tonight. I am so happy that you're here. We haven't done this in a hot minute. I kind of took a break. Life was kind of getting in the way, and I didn't want this podcast to be something that stressed me out and something that I was just doing to put out content. And so what I decided to do is I'm only going to put these out when I'm talking to people that I want to talk to. So I'm not going to go out of my way to just produce content on a weekly basis. With that said, tonight I have a guest on that I'm super excited to talk about, and let's bring her on. Josie, the Redheaded Libertarian. How are you doing tonight, Josie?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me, Casey.
Yeah, I'm super excited about tonight. I want to start off with just saying it's been an incredible experience watching your account grow from, like a couple of thousand. I can't remember if it was like 2 or 3 or like 6,000 when I first came across your account. And now it's like, what, you're a couple 100,000, more than that, like a half mil, something like that.
Yeah, 560,000.
Whoo. What has that been like for you?
Crazy. Just a year and a half ago, I was at 70,000. So it was, I blew up. And I didn't see it coming. I didn't plan for it. I just talked and people listened. So I'll take it and keep riding this wave as long as it'll have me.
Do you attribute that to anything in particular? Like a lot of people that I see that their accounts blow up, like Clint, for example,
Mm-hmm.
they specialize in something. And Clint brings a lot to the table when he's talking about ESG and finance and some of these other, they're not conspiracies, but like some of these other background things that are happening in government. And then you're kind of the same way about 1776 stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's my kind of my niche is 1776. I would actually attribute growing. I had my account banned back in 2021.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And the day after Elon Musk announced that he was going to buy Twitter, my account appeared back to me, and that was in April.
Funny how that works, huh?
Right? It's just a coincidence, I'm sure. So that was in April of 2022, and right after that happened, I was hired by Timcast, and so I started that and that association, and then Elon Musk followed me later that actually he followed me this year, but still he began responding to me and communicating with me, and his engagements, that brings a lot of attention to an account too when he engages with them. So there's a little bit there. He engaged me maybe once a month, so it's not like something I've relied on him about or anything like that. But those are kind of two major things that happened right after I got my account back that I would say definitely helped in my growth. But then when it comes to what I specialize in, I've got my finger on the pulse of something that is missing from America, whether it's from the schools, whether it's from our history, whether it's from just what people know. And that's that I use source documents when I talk about revolutionary history. So I can tell you the facts about what happened and not the stories about what happened in a way that is embellished or egregious or offensive or racist. I just tell you what happened as it happened. And I mean, these were people just like you and me.
So how did you get into kind of becoming a historian of sorts when it comes to the revolutionary period?
I've always loved that era. I've been drawn to it just my entire adult life, for sure. Even when I was a kid, I was really interested in history. So I would hear stories, and then I hear other stories, and then I'd hear more stories. And I'm kind of neurotic when it comes to the truth. And I found that I like to research this stuff, and I like to get to the bottom of it. And I developed this love for old newspapers from the 1770s. And just reading through the documents, how they were written, just the stories of our founders, and from a time where liberty was just at its peak. And I just always felt so drawn to that time that I wanted to study it and do the best with it that I could possibly do, and then to teach others about it.
Yeah, I think the vibe of that time period is missing in today's time period. Um, you know, when people hear the word insurrection or insurrectionist, it's like a dirty word now. But people often forget that this country and all of us were born out of insurrection.
Yes, our founding fathers were insurrectionists. Had they lost the Revolutionary War, George Washington would have been lucky to be shot in a general's death. He would have been hung likely, as would everybody else who was fighting, because it was treason. Signing the Declaration of Independence was treason. There were bounties on the heads of Sam Adams and John Hancock when they signed the Declaration of Independence. And John Hancock, he wrote his name so large on the Declaration of Independence because King George had put a bounty on John Hancock's head, and it was low in John Hancock's opinion, so he was offended by it. So he wanted to stick it to King George by making his name the biggest, so, quote, King George could read it without his spectacles. So that was just a way of, he was trolling him.
Yeah, I love it. Mm-hmm. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the Boston Tea Party. Was it yesterday? Was the 250th anniversary?
Yes, it was.
But before we get into the meat of that, I have a few more questions. That's just kind of a get to know you sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And my main question that I ask a lot of people on this podcast is, how did you become a libertarian? What was your journey to that?
I've always been one, and I never really fit anywhere. So growing up, I mean, I'm a Zennial, so I'm like an early millennial. And I was in high school.
How old are you?
We don't ask ladies that.
Oh, you're right. My bad. Yeah.
I'm in my.
I was asking because I'm probably in a similar category age-wise.
Probably. We can't put my age out there. I'd never live it down.
That's fair enough. Moving on.
Yeah. So I'm in my 30s, but I was in high school when 9/11 happened, and everybody went really hard conservative after that, really pro-war, really, we need justice, we need to whatever. And, I kind of was like, okay, let's, kind of get into this. Let's kind of be a little hockey. And I was like, this doesn't really work for me. And then at the same time, I'm toying with friends that were LGBT and trying to figure that out and navigate that with them. And, then I'm like, I'm not really this liberal either. So what am I? And I didn't fit anywhere. And I spent a long time kind of in limbo. And then I found the Ron Paul revolution in 2012. And I know that started earlier, but I didn't find it until 2012. And I was like, oh, well, there I am. That makes perfect sense to me. And the rest is history. I mean, after Donald Trump was elected, I was living up in Massachusetts at the time. Now I'm in Florida. But when he was elected, people lost their minds. They absolutely lost their minds. And I didn't lose my mind. I was like, okay, it's a president. No person should have enough power where it's going to personally affect you anyway. Like, why are you losing your minds? And I didn't really have a place to vet. Just to vent anything about it or to kind of sort my own feelings out. So I came to Twitter in December of 2017, and I've been on since then and just kind of finding my tribe.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
I kind of had a similar experience with Twitter. It took a while for me to find kind of the same tribe. Mm-hmm. And I was a little late to to the Ron Paul movement, I guess, because my movement was more Dave Smith and Clint Russell, and then through them, Ron Paul, that sort of thing. But yeah, it's been a blessing finding, people that you fit in with politically, and it just makes everything else easier because you don't feel like you're alone out there in your thoughts, that sort of thing. Yeah. I want to go back to something that you said though. You mentioned that you moved from Massachusetts to Florida. Mm-hmm. Can you tell the audience a little bit about that story, like why you moved?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a mother. I'm raising 3 children, and I didn't like the way that the COVID tyranny was handled up there whatsoever. They were trying to do there were massive lockdowns. They had the kids out of school for almost a year. They were the teachers unions were making demands that, and then like not following through on what they said they would do after a demand like that. So like, for instance, they were keeping the windows open in negative degree weather in my first graders classroom after they install filters. And why on earth are you doing that? Like, and then they would do it on the buses too. They keep all the windows down on the buses, and in the winter, with little kids. And so the teachers unions, they were more scared of the children than they were ready to protect the children from immediate diseases like getting sick because it's negative 20 degrees out and you kept the windows in your classroom down. So there was that. They were trying to make it so that open air eateries, if you didn't have a vaccine and you were over 6 years old, you weren't allowed in any venue with an open air eatery. That would include like a Big Y or a Publix or a Kroger that has a food court. You wouldn't be allowed in there. You wouldn't be allowed to grocery shop if you didn't have a vaccine. And they were pushing this as early as March of 2022. I mean, they were still pushing this. So that did it for me for sure. And then there was all the trans stuff that I kind of saw the writing on the wall about raising a tomboy. I was like, I don't want any of this to affect her. So, I mean, Florida was the right decision for me and my family. And we came here, and my girls have been thriving ever since.
That's awesome. Yeah. One of the things that I respect you and Clint most for are the fact that you moved, you from Massachusetts and then Clint from California. That's not an easy thing to do. Luckily I've been in Texas the whole time, so I didn't really have to deal with all of that, the same as up north. Another thing I want to ask you about is you relatively recently started doing the spaces. So how's that been going for you? And can you tell the audience a little bit about that and like who you've had on so far?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I do a show called Spaces with Josie, and it's on x.com, and it also streams through live members only on Timcast. And I've had on so many cool guests. I've had on Lauren Southern, Vivek Ramaswamy twice, Thomas Massey twice, Andrew Heaton. I've had on Spike Cohen. I've had on Clint Russell. I've had on Dave Smith, Scott Horton.
You had Zuby on.
I had Zuby on just
like yesterday.
Yep. Just had Zuby on like the 14th, I think. Oh my God. The author of Dilbert, Scott.
Oh yeah, Scott Adams.
Had Scott Adams on. Yep. Just so many cool, amazing people. And just get to have conversations with them. I have on a lot of authors. Sometimes I'll have on, smaller, less known people and kind of boost them. If somebody interests me, if somebody speaks to me, if I think somebody is incredible and I want to platform them and share their journey, that's what I use Spaces for. And it's really taken off. It's one of the well-known spaces on X. People look forward to it. It's just such a gift to be able to do that, and I'm glad that that's what I do through Timcast is Spaces with Josie. So I have these spaces on a few times a week. I'm taking a little break probably until next year because of the holidays coming up. I have some really cool guests on. Haven't booked them yet, but they're big names, my biggest names yet, and they'll be on in January.
That's awesome. Did you ever think that you would be rubbing elbows with some of these people?
Nope. Not in my wildest dreams. I'm like, it's funny to me because I've been recognized in public. If I go to events, I get recognized, and people are like, they give me hugs, and I don't know who they are, which is fine. I'm a hugger, but like, it's like, you've changed my life, and I'm a normal person. I'm honestly a normal person. So it's incredibly humbling and flattering, and just it's unbelievable, the life that I've created, and what I do and what I get to do, who I get to meet, and how I inspire people. I didn't mean to do any of it. It was all an accident. So it just blows my mind every single day I wake up, and I'm just grateful every single day. And I adore my fans, and just I love my life.
That's awesome. Has this been able to like take over as your full-time job?
Hmm. Yes,
That's
yes.
legit.
Yeah, it's been able to take over as my full time job, and I just get to do Twitter and do spaces and be on podcasts and go up to DC and hang out with Tim, and it's just go to Miami. And I was on a Luke Rudkowski and Clint Russell's podcast a few weeks ago. Like, just get to live my life and do these cool things and have fun. I was up at the Libertarian convention in Connecticut recently. Probably headed to the one in Georgia in January. And just get to live my best life, support my kids, love my family.
That's awesome. Since we're kind of talking about Timcast a little bit, do you have a favorite person that you get to see that's one of the regulars on Tim's show whenever you go?
Oh my goodness. Like I love all of them. Like I adore Tim. Tim and I were friends before he even hired me. We've been friends since like 2018 or 2019. Um, and I love Phil. I love Ian. I love Luke and Seamus. They're all incredible. And any chance I get to see them and spend time with them is so much fun. We did this event in Miami and I got to see all of them and hang out with them and they're just such good people, when you're with your people. And
Yeah.
that took me a long time to find my people. So
Is Ian as much of a character in real life as he comes off like on the podcast?
yes, he's even a bigger personality. I've been on his podcast. I've had
That's
him on my
amazing.
podcast, but I got to watch him speak in Austin at a Mises Caucus convention that they did, and he changes the energy in the room. He becomes this different person. It's him, but it becomes this person that's just everybody just goes silent and just listens to him talk. He just grabs everybody's attention. He is so charismatic and smart and just a great person to be around all around.
That's awesome. Another thing I wanted to kind of briefly touch on is something that I appreciate about you is that you kind of it's twofold or two different kind of separate topics that connect. Um, you kind of stick to your guns is the first one. And then the second one that is semi related with where I'm going with it is that you have an appreciation for comedy and not just regular comedy, but maybe a little dangerous comedy or irreverent.
Mm-hmm.
And I really appreciate that about you because it's not something that you see every day. And it's nearly like the bigger that someone gets, they nearly tend to stray away from that because it can cause, negative attention, that sort of thing. But I haven't really seen that with you. And, I just want to let you know that I appreciate that because I feel like we need more people out there that, have this same appreciation for the comedy and then they're not going to be ashamed or they're not going to be shamed for having that appreciation. Does that make sense?
No, that does. That's something. If somebody tells me not to talk to somebody, I'm going to talk to them harder. If somebody tells me not to say a certain word because it's offensive, I'm going to say the word harder. Within the '90s rules. The '90s rules are important. It's
What are the 90s rules?
You can say, well, I can't say. Are we on YouTube?
Yes.
Okay, YouTube doesn't abide by the '90s rules, so I can't
Okay.
go into detail with the '90s rules, or you're going to get this dropped, and I don't want
Okay.
to do that.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Well, so '90s rules when it comes to words that you can say. I like to watch offensive comedy. It makes me laugh because that's the point of comedy. So once a week I watch Tower Gang. I'm actually the Tower Power Hour.
There you go.
Yep. So I like to watch Tower Gang on Wednesdays. And they have offensive comedy and it's not for everybody. But it makes me laugh. And that's the thing about comedy is laughter is a reaction to something unexpected. It's almost like a defense mechanism. And I mean, somebody who can make me laugh until I cry or till my sides hurt, those are the best people. And the Tower Gang can do that. And so that's my kind of one little decompression that I do.
Yeah.
That I do once a week for sure. And then
I save unless I'm joining live, I save their podcast for Fridays.
Uh-huh.
That
Oh,
way I
just
can have
enjoy
something
it.
to look forward to, at the end of the
Uh-huh.
work week.
Yep. No, definitely. So Yeah, I like to watch the Tower Gang, and I like to be as offensive as I can on X to a reasonable extent, and I don't back down from anybody who tries to censor me or shame me, because that just I've been silenced. I had my page gone for a year and a half, and that was never going to happen to me again. So I hold true to who I am when it comes to
Yeah,
that.
that's the way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're here to talk about the Boston Tea Party, so I'm going to let you just have the floor.
Absolutely. So I wrote something up and I read it yesterday because I am neurotic when it comes to getting things right. And this monologue that I did yesterday was about a 15-minute monologue, and it would take me a few weeks probably to memorize that. So I did write a bunch of stuff down. I'm happy just to read it so that the facts are correct if you'd like. I'm not sure if
Yeah,
that's
whatever you want to do.
all right, cool. All right, so I'll just give you what I did yesterday for
Sweet.
I think it was 37,000 people have watched it now.
Good Lord.
No,
That's awesome.
I got to tell you, people were just RSVPing to this. I had the most RSVPs I've ever had to a space, including Vivek. So people, this was a desire that people had to hear this. So
Yeah, for sure.
All right, buckle up, sit down, get comfy.
I'm ready.
We do not always know what we are capable of until we do it. We might not understand the power of our words until we speak them. This is the human condition. Our curiosities are universal, and as should be our courage. So when Thomas Paine published The American Crisis on December 19th, 1776, he wanted to rally Americans behind the war effort and help them free themselves from the tyranny of King George, and in doing so, he managed to inspire a moment so prolific it would change the course of history. By Christmas 1776, the Continental Army was more than a year and a half out from the battles of Lexington and Concord, and they were losing. The weather was poor, supplies were dwindling, many were sick with influenza, typhoid, the smallpox, numbers were falling whether by death or desertion, and their contracts were set to expire. They knew challenging the crown was treason, and if they failed, they'd be put to death. Morale was low, the soldiers were demoralized, afraid, and without hope. But Christmas night, 1776, sitting around a campfire, their stars would change. One of the soldiers had gotten hold of Thomas Paine's The American Crisis, which had only been published the previous week. The men would begin passing it around the fire. Each man would take a turn reading it aloud, passage after passage, getting more and more louder and galvanized by the moment. They were suddenly reinvigorated and remembered their purpose. The words of Thomas Paine had lit a fire in these men, and that filled them with hope and continued to burn, and at just the right time, it would seem. That night, General George Washington would lead these troops across the icy Delaware in a surprise attack against the Hessian mercenaries, camped out at Trenton and still sleeping off their Christmas brandy. This win changed the trajectory of the war and history as we know it. Many of these men would attribute their win not only to their cunning genius of their commander-in-chief, but the simplicity, cogency, and timeliness of the American crisis. How easy it is for us to become demoralized. How easy it is to look around and to see a two-tier justice system, state-owned media, questionable election conduct, a behemoth national debt, crippling inflation, unmanageable interest rates, medical tyranny, anti-parent movements, a perverted agenda that's coming for our children, an invasion at our borders, a weaponized FBI against mothers, Catholics, peaceful protesters, cronyism, corporatism, gaslighting, and abuses of power so extreme that they dwarf many of the grievances outlined by Thomas Jefferson in our Declaration of Independence. How easy it is to give up. But to understand the present, we must understand the past. We must recognize that history often rhymes, and we must remain acutely aware that coursing through our veins is the blood of the bravest patriots who ever lived, removed from us by only a handful of generations. It is essential we remember this, especially in times where we feel without hope. We must understand their stories in order to know where to look for the answers to our own. The winter of 1776 was not the first time that our forefathers overcame demoralization and fought back. They had done it 3 years prior at the Boston Tea Party. In autumn of 1773, flyers and pamphlets began showing up on doors and on trees, signed by this mysterious, enigmatic man called Rusticus. His true identity has since been lost to history. The flyers read, quote, "Make sure your watchmen be instructed as they go on their rounds to call out every night 12:30, beware the East India Company," end quote. Since earlier that year, the world's largest multinational conglomerate, the East India Company, or the EIC, had been undercutting the prices of their competitors, those competitors primarily being smugglers like John Hancock and Sam Adams. The colonists had gotten wind of this and boycotted the EIC in support of their colonial entrepreneurs. The EIC became enraged, and in retaliation, the couple of small ships they were sending turned into this enormous burden, transporting immense quantities of tea and tying up the harbors. The colonists, already upset, became furious. Now, conventional history regarding the Boston Tea Party will tell us that the colonists were provoked by the 1773 Tea Act, in which Parliament commanded a modest tea hike to be paid by the colonists to settle England's war debt. And that's part of it, but it's nearly not even close to the extent of what the Tea Act and King George actually did. In reality, the Townshend Acts of 1767 had levied a 3 pence per 16-ounce tax on tea. So what does that mean? Well, we're going to do some redcoat math. So 1 pound equals 20 shillings and 1 shilling equals 12 pence. If 16 ounces of tea was 0.11 pounds, that would equal about 2 shillings. So the 3 pence tax at wholesale added up to about a 25% tax on just this one item. To further put this number into perspective, the average tax burden for the American household today is sales tax is about 25%. While colonists could just have stopped drinking tea to avoid this tax, Americans today, they don't really have a choice of how to escape that burden. However, this backroom deal gets even worse, and for the colonists from here, and more relatable for you and for I. So enshrined in the Tea Act was the East India Company's petition to the king to suppress the duty of the tea to the colonies, which granted the EIC both an absolute monopoly on the tea trade and the largest corporate tax cut in the history of the world. They were also fully reimbursed by the crown, or the taxpayers, for the lost or unsold product, which amounted to billions in today's money. So to recap, England wasn't paying their war debt. The EIC wasn't paying any duties on any tea sent to the colonies. The EIC was being reimbursed for all their lost product while having a monopoly, and the colonists were picking up the tab for all of it. And this upset the entrepreneurs because not only was the crown hurting them via taxation without representation, but the EIC was able to undercut them due to the royal cronyism, which was harming their businesses. On the day of the Boston Tea Party, one of the largest public meetings in Boston convened at the Old South Meeting House. There were as many as 5,000 colonists spilling into the streets. Speeches by Sam Adams and John Hancock, Joseph Warren, and other Boston Whig leaders called for the return of the tea to England. Later in the evening, word came that the last-minute plea to Governor Hutchinson to let the ships return was refused. Sam Adams announced publicly, "This meeting can do nothing further to save our country." And chants of "Make Boston Harbor a teapot tonight" rang out through the streets. So how do I know all of this? Well, the answer is not taught to you in school. It can only be found in one place, in a book. And this book is one of the earliest textbooks, and it's titled Retrospect of the Boston Tea Party, with a memoir of George R.T. Hughes, who survived the little band of patriots who drowned the tea in Boston Harbor in 1773. It is a very, very long book. I have it right here, but it's propping up my camera. So if I move it, things are going to get wild. So this book, this memoir, is the only firsthand account that we have of what happened that night of the Boston Tea Party. It's the only firsthand account, and it's a national treasure. Very few records of who Hughes was survived the last 250 years. We know that he was a friend of Paul Revere and a confidant of George Washington, who once remarked in a letter that Hughes was, quote, "an incredibly good-natured young man," end quote. We also know that while Thomas Jefferson often referred to Boston Tea Party as the incident down at Boston Harbor, it was Hughes who coined the term the Boston Tea Party. Now, I could give you a rundown in my own words of what happened that night, that the little band of patriots drowned the tea in Boston Harbor, but the fact that we have a firsthand, unadulterated account by a participant is something that we cannot and should not take for granted. So I'm going to read to you in George R.T. Hughes' own words the story of what happened the night of December 16th, 1773, down at Boston Harbor, when Hughes was just 17 years old. From the memoir of George R.T. Hughes. It was now evening, and I immediately dressed myself in the costume of an Indian, equipped with a small hatchet which I and my associates denominated the tomahawk, and a club. After having painted my hands and face with coal dust in the shop of a blacksmith, I repaired to Griffin's Wharf, where the ships lay that contained the tea. When I first appeared in the street after being thus disguised, I fell in with many who were dressed, equipped, and painted as I was, and who fell in with me, and marched in order to the place of our destination. When we arrived at the wharf, there were 3 of our number who assumed an authority to direct our operations, to which we readily submitted. They divided us into 3 parts for the purpose of boarding the 3 ships, which contained the tea at the time. The name of him who commanded the division to which I was assigned was Leonard Pitt. The names of the other commanders I never knew. We were immediately ordered by the respective commanders to board all the ships at the same time, which we promptly obeyed. The commander of the division to which I belonged, as soon as we were on board the ship, appointed me boatswain and ordered me to go to the captain and demand of him the keys to the hatches and a dozen candles. I made the demand accordingly, and the captain promptly replied and delivered the articles, but requested me at the same time to do no damage to the ship or its rigging. We then were ordered by the commander to open the hatches and to take out the chests of tea and throw them overboard, and we immediately proceeded to execute these orders, first cutting and splitting the chests with our tomahawks so as to thoroughly expose them to the effects of the water. In about 3 hours from the time on board, we had thus broken and thrown overboard every chest of tea to be found on the ship, while those in the other ships were disposing of the tea at the same time in the same way. We were surrounded by British armed ships, but no attempt was made to resist us. We then quietly retired to the several places of residence without having any conversation with each other or taking any measures to discover who were our associates. Nor do I recollect of our having had the knowledge of the name of a single individual concerned with the affair, except that of Leonard Pitt, the commander of my division, who I have mentioned. There appeared to be an understanding that each individual should volunteer his services, keep his own secret, and risk the consequences for himself. No disorder took place during that transaction, and it was observed at that time that the stillest night ensued that Boston had enjoyed for many months. 342 chests of tea carried by the East India Company, weighing 92,000 pounds, or roughly 46 tons, and worth $1.7 million in today's money, was aboard the Beaver, the Dartmouth, and the Eleanor. These chests were smashed open by the Sons of Liberty and their affiliates, armed with an assortment of axes, and dumped in Boston Harbor on December 16, 1773. Of the 342 chests of tea, we know 240 chests were documented as black and green teas from China, including Bohea, Kongu, Souchong, Singlo, and Hyson. It was low tide at the time, and the tea was piling up in the harbor, so young colonial boys were sent into the water to stomp down the tea so it would not spoil, which worked. None of the 46 tons of tea could be saved. These men and a handful of women all abided by the strict code of silence that lasted 50 years. Not a soul involved violated that code. Even this book was published, I think, in 1832. Many even took their participation to their graves, even after it was safe to talk about. There are 116 known participants of the Boston Tea Party, but that number is thought to be 150 to 200. These colonists didn't do it for glory. They did it because tyranny's wrong. John Adams' diary entry from December 17, 1773, 250 years ago today, reads in part, "Last night, 3 cargoes of Bohea tea were emptied into the sea. This is the most magnificent movement of all. There is a dignity, a majesty, a sublimity in the last effort of the patriots, and I greatly admire. This destruction of the tea is so bold, so daring, so firm, intrepid, and inflexible. And it must have so important consequences and so lasting that I cannot but consider it an epocha of history." So we do not know what we are capable of until we do it. We do not know the power of our words until we speak them, and we can learn from our heroes of the past and defeat the villains of the present and the future if we listen. It is essential in days like these to always seek to be inspired and to be the reason others are inspired. And if we live by this code like our forefathers, we will never lose hope. After all, these are the times that try men's souls, and it's only treason if you lose.
That's awesome. Powerful stuff. I didn't know that none of them knew each other.
Nope. It was this secrecy because they knew they were only responsible for themselves. There was a lot of personal responsibility and accountability at the time between the colonists, and they really swore by it. We don't have people like that today. I mean, people will call the cops on their neighbors for not wearing a mask outside walking their dog. You know, this was just such a special time in our history, and I think that's why I'm so drawn to it.
Or flip side of that, if you do something important or noteworthy, usually people want everybody else to know about it. You know, they'll film themselves doing it or you know, whatever.
Yeah.
So that's
They'll do that. They'll take a selfie while they're giving a homeless person a sandwich. It's just, you know, you do it for intention, not for attention when it comes to good deeds.
You know, I've heard Vivek say a couple times that we're in a 1776 moment.
I love that, and I hope he's right.
I hope he's right too. You know, Tim's kind of famous for saying the Civil War thing, but I hope that it does not come to that. And I hope that just a 1776 spirit is, you know, resurrected in everyone.
Well, there were, so I'd mentioned about the grievances in the Declaration of Independence and how we're reliving many of those right now. Unfair trials for those in power. So the redcoats, they would get treated differently. Like they were usually not punished. And we see that kind of with the Capitol Police. You know, we see kind of comparisons there with how they're treated. It was kind of a police state, which we sort of have. We have a surveillance state. They were really controlling the colonists through their trade. They were controlling them through their speech, the press. They could lock up journalists. We see that, you know, them trying to come for journalists when it comes to what's going on now with J6. Many journalists are being locked up for that. I think there's a Blaze reporter that's got to turn himself in this week. And then there's the taxing. And I mean, after everything that I've talked about, like the taxing seems just small next to the rest of it. But you know, that's just another awful thing that they're doing. There's a lot of evil people in power, as there were with the Massachusetts governance law that happened after the Boston Tea Party. They passed a series of intolerable acts, and these included that the king pretty much wiped out all their leadership and put in his own leadership who could pick their own leadership, and it was just cancer. And so we have kind of that sort of dynamic right now when it comes to the deep state and who's in charge of things there. So there's just a lot of similarities, and it's kind of bone chilling when you see it.
Yeah, am I remembering this right, where the Boston Tea Party inspired a similar event in Philly shortly after? Is that?
Yes, you're right. I didn't research these too much, but there were a few other Boston Tea Parties that followed. Just none were of that magnitude of the Boston Tea Party.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So, like you were saying, the response to the Boston Tea Party was the intolerable acts, right? And that kind of was the next spark for sparking the war.
Yes, that was the powder keg. After that happened, because what happened is the king laid down these intolerable acts. You know, he started quartering soldiers in homes. He just became more tyrannical, and he closed the ports. Another one was the Ports Act. He closed the Boston ports so that the only ships that could come in were like necessary ships from Britain carrying necessary supplies, but everything else was blocked off. All their trade was cut off. so he was being an absolute tyrant. And when this happened, all of the other colonies like rallied behind Massachusetts, and so it just emboldened them. And less than a year and a half later, the battles of Lexington and Concord happened. So it was building, but it started with, like I said, the Townshend Acts, which were 1767, and then there was the Boston Massacre in 1770, and all of these were just traumatic events for the colonists, and it just emboldened them to know what liberty is and to not take any crap from any tyrants.
Something that I think is interesting that I either wasn't taught in school or it was skimmed over, or maybe I wasn't paying attention and didn't catch it the first time around, is that not everybody was on board with the Revolutionary War and the insurrection in general. Like when we were taught that, they kind of gave off the vibe that everybody was in on it, that sort of thing. But that wasn't the case. There are a lot of people that were totally against it.
Ben Franklin was opposed to it. There were a lot of founding fathers that opposed it at first, and they had to be convinced of it. There were loyalists. It was probably about 50% of the country was for it, 50% was against it, and that number shifted more toward the colonists as they began winning battles after crossing the Delaware, for instance, after Saratoga, and they were starting to win. People became more empowered. Also, Thomas Paine's The American Crisis, he wrote, I'd mentioned that in my lecture. So that was a series of pamphlets that he released over the course of the war, and people would read those, and just the way that he spoke to them, he was very big behind the war effort due to what it meant large scale. So people would read that, and that would embolden them. So it's just a matter of a message that speaks to you, and that's why it's so important to communicate. And a lot of times they talked in equivalent to, honestly, memes that we spread back and forth to each other. They did pictures, illustrations. They really wrote like for instance, Sam Adams wrote this whole thing calling King George a prostitute, which was one of the worst things you could possibly do. And he didn't care. That was treasonous. He didn't care. He did it. And then I think Paul Revere illustrated it. So this is how they stuck it to their leaders, because you get to a point where you just got to laugh at them, because when you laugh at them, it takes their power away.
Yeah. What parallels can you draw from the Boston Tea Party and just that time period to today? And what are maybe some lessons that we can take from that and apply it to today?
So what we're seeing with the states kind of rising up against the government, that's comparative to the Boston Tea Party, whether it's not having the transing happening in the schools, homeschooling. There's another one. It's the way parents are taking back their kids from the state. It's kind of seeing the individuals step up and fight against something that they don't believe in. We saw it during with the states during COVID tyranny. South Dakota refused to deal with any of it. They're like, we're not going to humor you. Sorry. Florida was good about it. There were other states too. South Carolina, pretty good about it. And that's a way that relates to the Boston Tea Party and kind of just having that don't tell me what to do kind of aspect. When it comes to the Boston Massacre, you can relate that closely to J6 with who died during it. It was a massacre, and the only people who died were, for J6, were at the hands of the Capitol Police. And the only difference is that the Redcoats had a trial and the Capitol Police did not. And that's just another grievance of the Declaration of Independence. But that's a similarity there. So we're kind of living it right now, pre-revolutionary. As I said, history doesn't always repeat itself, but it does often rhyme.
I wonder sometimes if we'll get back to having that same 1776 spirit, or if things are too good right now and people are too comfortable to see any real change like that. Do you have any insight on that?
Oh yeah, we're going to need to suffer before we really get to that point. We see like Vivek comes out and he's got a 1776 spirit. I love that. Congressman Massey, Mike Lee, Senator Paul, they're all freedom fighters. You know, we have a lot of voices that are freedom fighters too, and even people who aren't afraid to speak, like Tucker Carlson or Alex Jones. You know, so we have people who aren't afraid to speak. We have leaders who are brave as well. But in order to get to the point where everybody else sees it, where the normal people are no longer comfortable, we're going to need to reach probably like Argentina, a hyperinflation. I mean, and they got Malay with that, and it took a long time. It took a lot of socialism, and it took a lot of people admitting they were wrong in order to get to that point. And it took huge discomfort and the inability to exist for people to be like, wow, we got to fix this. Unfortunately, that's just the way it is. They become numb to it. Maybe it's predictive programming, I'm not sure, but people become numb to it, and it's good that there are voices that are not numb to it.
Yeah. Words to chew on and thoughts to chew on for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, before we switch gears a little bit, do you have anything else that you want to hit on that?
Nope, that really like summed it all up. You asked a lot of great questions. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate you telling that. It was incredible.
Thank you.
So I have one last question for you, and I saved the best one for last. How did you get into pie making?
My grandmother taught me everything I knew. I always enjoyed it. It was kind of like I'm an artist, and I only do art. I can draw with pencils, and I can paint with like acrylics. And I started doing pies and decorating the top. And I mean, I can tell you, I cannot decorate a cake to save my life. Like I can't paint my nails, but when it comes to painting with acrylics, and when it comes to decorating pie, like pie dough and roses and lattice work, it's an art to me, and it's just something I have a natural talent for. So it's something, you know, I like to embrace and decompress and do it. And I love that it's pie baking season, and I can turn the oven on in Florida.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite pie to make, and then do you have a favorite pie taste wise, and are they different?
Nope, they're actually the same. My favorite pie to make doesn't have lattice work. It's not a fruit pie. It's actually bourbon pecan pie. My favorite pie to make, and it's my favorite pie to eat. It's delicious.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've talked about that before on Twitter, probably a couple years ago, but that's my favorite too.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. I look forward to it every Thanksgiving and Christmas.
Yep.
Actually, I don't know if I'll get it on Christmas, but I had it for Thanksgiving, and it was just tremendous.
I've made it like throughout the year just to have it. I've tried to make it like pecan pie bars using the same thing, so it's not like a pie, but more like a brownie type of thing. I've done that. I love it so much. It's so good. So yeah, that's my favorite one, and that's an award winner. I have a blue ribbon for that. My recipe for that.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're coming up on an hour or a little bit short of it, but do you want to shout anything out before we go, Josie?
Sure. You can follow me on x.com at TRHL official, or you can go to timcast.com and become a subscriber there and become a member and help support our work.
Awesome. All right. Well, I appreciate you joining, Josie. And guys, if you will give her a follow and join her spaces and all of that kind of stuff. And then same with mine, if you want to subscribe and follow on Twitter. That's where we're at. All right. See you, Josie. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.